Hello. Today we'll be talking about the subject of scarcity, which I will here define as this feeling that there simply aren't enough resources in the world to go around. And this feeling keeps us hoarding what perceived little we do have, or the in fact little that some of us have. And it keeps us from reaching out to those who need help. It keeps us paralyzed. Even if we want to help, we wonder, will there be enough if we do? So we're going to get to that place by way of a well-worn story, which is found in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. And the story goes: The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now, many saw them going and recognized them and hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "Are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves have you? Go and see." When they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. I'd like to share a favorite story of one Booker T. Washington, the great African-American educator, author, orator, and even advisor to presidents. And he was fond of telling the following story. And this is the story as was written down by a Reverend Dr. Alice McKenzie. And it goes: A ship lost at sea in the Atlantic Ocean along the northern coast of South America for many days suddenly sighted a friendly vessel. From the mast of this unfortunate vessel came the signals: "Water, water, we die of thirst." The answer from the friendly vessel came back at once: "Cast down your bucket where you are." A second time the signal: "Water, send us water," from the distressed vessel, and was answered again: "Cast down your bucket where you are." A third and fourth signal for water was again answered: "Cast down your bucket where you are." The captain of the distressed vessel at last heeded the injunction, cast down his bucket. It came up full of fresh, sparkling water from the mouth of the Amazon River, which extends miles out into the ocean in what is called the River Sea. In this story, a ship full of people had an urgent need for fresh water, and it was the whole while closer at hand than they knew. Similarly, one day, thousands of years ago, 12 persons were tasked with feeding thousands of people, and the answer seemed so far off, but it was ever so near. In that time, Jesus turned to the 12, as we read, and said, "You feed them." And we understand why the disciples pushed back, and the gist of their response can be summarized in 2 words. With what? With what will we feed them? And this question still haunts us today. The world is still filled with people in desperate need. And we'd like to meet those needs. We're nice people after all, but is there enough to go around? Will there be enough for us if we do help? For us, our family, our nation? And this is the question that I'd like to explore today. Is there enough? Well, at the beginning of this account, this reading, we read how the disciples returned from their own missions completely tapped out. And during their own missions, they did things that Jesus had done up to this point. So now Jesus and the disciples are trying to get away. They are, all of them, very tired. And who can blame them? They've been giving so much of themselves. And the text reads that they were in such high demand even then that they didn't even have time to eat. It's no wonder they went packing. So they did as Jesus recommended. They all make off by boat to some deserted place for a little quiet, a little rest, some time alone. And who can blame them? But the story goes, now many saw them going and recognized them and hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. So imagine that you are off for a vacation and the problems you are leaving behind are in front of you. Manifest in the people that need your help. It goes on to say, as he went ashore, he, being Jesus, saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. This text paints a picture of a people who are desperate for the realm of God, that place where justice is achieved, where the hungry have food, where the sick are healed, where those who need housing have housing, and basically where things are as they should be, or as we hope that they were. And Jesus said that he brought this realm with him wherever he went, and he preached about how its coming was imminent for all. Notice how the disciples bring it with them as well. They have been empowered to do so in the last chapter. But is there enough to go around? And at this point, I would say that these weary, worn disciples would say no. And this question about is there enough will narrow before the day is done. As the day wore on, the disciples turned to Jesus and mentioned that the time is late and that the people should probably be dismissed and go procure food for themselves. Says the very ones who lately haven't had time to eat themselves because, and this is very important, don't forget it, because they have been caring for these people alongside Jesus. Now, it would seem they are tapped out. They don't have enough. And so it would seem that they are concerned for the well-being of the people, but one can imagine that perhaps they just want them gone out of the way because by now they are truly tired, perhaps hungry themselves. So to answer the question posed earlier, no. No, there is not enough to go around, not enough energy, time, and in this instance, food, for the people are hungry. And then Jesus has the gall to say to them, you feed them. And one of them said, what, are we going to go spend 200 denarii on food? Know that 1 denarii was equal to 1 day's wages. So let me rephrase the disciples' question. Do you want me to go and spend almost 7 months' wages on food? Right here, right now? No, let me repeat the disciples' question in such a way as to get to its heart. Basically, the disciple is asking, with what? Feed them with what? And Jesus says, what have you got? And they respond, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That should have ended it right there. They probably should have just given up. You know, churches possessing far more have made the decision to pack up shop and shutter their doors. And who can blame them? And who could blame the disciples if they had decided to give up that day? This question about resources is a big one. Feed the world with what? Change the world for the good. Yeah, with what army? There is so much to be done. How can we, with what little we have, do anything to change the tides? And I don't know if you've felt as if you've tried to come to terms with the problems in the world and have been overwhelmed. Take hunger, poverty, violence, hatred. You consider how our institutions are motivated by their own self-preservation and greed, churches included. You lament about the money spent on war making which is regrettably all too profitable. And Jesus looks at all of this and situations like it, on the crowd, us, and has great compassion because we are like sheep without a shepherd. The text reads that after he saw the crowd, he, out of an abundance of compassion, began to teach them many things. Wisdom, in fact. If only there were someone to teach us many things, the wise ways that will get us out of these messes. Teach us things in these modern times to engage our complex modern problems. Body of Christ, who is there to teach us? Body of Christ, it's you. It's us. And I know this is too much. It's just too much. Feed them with what? The spiritual truth of this story is overwhelming, but it is summarized as follows. When the world is on fire, it does no good to lament the lack of fire hoses, ladders, and professional equipment. What you do is you take the bucket you found in the garage, the measly garden hose connected to the spigot on the side of your house, and you get to work. The disciples discovered that day, when all was said and done, that they possessed enough to feed thousands. Call it a miracle, call it a change in perspective, call it the mysterious ways of God. But I've seen it done. People taking steps out in faith with the little that they think they have, only to discover that there is enough to go around in the end. You let the bucket at the base of the Amazon down into the water, and you discover there is more fresh water there than you ever knew. Enough to go around, but you could not see it before. You needed a little faith. What will we feed them with? Well, look around you. Our church buildings are the sort of places that the disciples had in mind when they suggested that they should send the crowd out to look for food. We have an abundance of possessions. We've got it. More than enough to go around. Reverend Dr. Alice McKenzie writes, sometimes we underestimate others' value and contributions only to realize them after the fact. We consign elderly relatives to the has-been bin, not realizing the rich resources of wisdom their stories can yield for us and ours. We dismiss our current circumstances, thinking the grass will always be greener in another place, job, relationship, or church. Perhaps we underestimate our gifts and ourselves. But what if, in the confines of our situations, with the gifts and abilities of people around us, within our own life stories and buried family heritage, there were untold riches, untapped resources of wisdom, energy, and inspiration? Then the message of this passage would be, cast down your buckets where you are and find human resources you didn't realize were there. And now I'm speaking to my own church at Northwood and any other church besides. Let's not look into the future lamenting what we lack, what we wish that we had, the people, the resources. We are haunted by a past when, let's face it, we probably had more than we knew what to do with back when. Now, by contrast, we feel so small, but we are not. We are enough. Our spiritual heritage contains one story after another where deserts give way to living water. There's a story where a small boy with a slingshot and some stones defeats a giant. There's another where a man goes into Egypt and brings an empire to its knees. I say one man, his brother went with him as well, so two. Fine. 2 men went into Egypt and brought an empire to its knees. And there's a story where a widow needs a certain sum of money to keep her children out of enslavement. And I'd like to read you that story before we conclude. It's found in the book of 2 Kings, the first 7 verses, and it goes. One of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, has died. You know that your servant feared the Lord. Now the creditor is coming to take my 2 children as his slaves." Elisha asked her, What can I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She said, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." Then he said, "Go and borrow empty containers from everyone, from all your neighbors. Do not get just a few. Then go in and shut the door behind you and your sons and pour oil into all these containers. Set the full ones to one side." So she left. After she had shut the door behind her and her sons, they kept bringing her containers, and she kept pouring. When they were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another container." But he replied, "There aren't any more." Then the oil stopped. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debt. You and your sons can live on the rest." Now, does that story sound familiar? It should, because it has parallels. It echoes the story that we read today about the multiplication of the loaves and the fish, where someone starts with not enough and discovers that they have all that they need. And our tradition tells of persons of faith who set out with nothing, sometimes nothing but a word of good news on their lips and the clothes on their backs. And we still tell their stories today. 5 loaves and 2 fish, and all ate and were filled. That's all it took that day. Northwood Christian Church and every other church, we have enough to go around, even if what we've got doesn't seem like much. I'll go down the street to the store and buy 5 loaves of bread if that's what it takes. Fish too? Sure, I'll take them on sale. My point is, there is enough here to change the world and to rewrite history. The question becomes, will we take what we've got and feed a starving world